We're very excited to have Tony from DoorDash here today. You were just talking through some of the competition that emerged, through all this, and famously, one of the really big, differentiated strategies that DoorDash had was to focus on these college towns and suburbs, and obviously Palo Alto being such an amazing version of that. And how much of that strategy was like obvious to you early on, or was that just kind of like we're kind of kicking ass here, and like this is pretty interesting that we're here and they're over there, and like
how much of it was luck versus skill, right? Look, there's always both, right? There's certainly the intentional part, but as I mentioned, as the entrepreneur, you don't get to control size of market, right? That part is always lucky. And any entrepreneur who says that they know the exact size of market, I think, is selling you something that you shouldn't buy. One of the points of view was that I mentioned that we did all the deliveries ourselves. And early on, it was very obvious to us that our core demo of people that wanted to use this product were families with young children, tended to be the mom. And when you spoke with her, you would understand it was a slam dunk reason why they would use delivery. Well, I mean, good luck. We actually I remember shadowing a mom to do a pickup order for her and her kids. It was a 45-minute exercise getting out the door one way, then another 15-minute drive, then another 15-minute situation to find parking, then good luck putting a double stroller through a small, narrow restaurant corridor, and then waiting for the food, and then doing all of that backwards, right, in reverse. It was almost a 1.5 hour, 2 hour exercise just to get, a couple of burgers for the kids. So that was a slam dunk decision, for us. Well, where do these families tend to live? They don't always live in city centers. That was, one of the early hypotheses we had. Number two, we did a lot of deliveries actually in the cities. We just didn't tell people about it. And one of the things we learned was that it was actually faster to deliver in places outside of the cities than the cities. In San Francisco, for example, good luck finding parking. Good luck, in this office, we have security, but if you were to go to like an apartment building, good luck getting through the gate code. All of those factors made it pretty clear to us that actually maybe it's better to start with the suburbs. So it wasn't like we knew for sure, but those are some insights. On the driver's side, one of the things early on that we learned was, one of our biggest fears when we were getting started and we saw, companies like Uber coming was, do drivers only care about how much money they made? Because if that's all they care about, we're going to lose. We're going to lose because it's obviously more valuable to transport Andrew than a burrito. And so we ran a very simple experiment. We had two groups of drivers. I remember, I think it was the UberX drivers in Palo Alto and the DoorDash drivers. They were roughly, making about $20 an hour. This is the control variable. We guarantee them $25 an hour to switch jobs. For the UberX guys to come over to DoorDash, DoorDash to go over to Uber. One driver out of two groups of 20, 1 out of 40 said yes. That to me was good enough to know that there's something else was going on, besides, whatever this whole thing about money was. And it turned out, it was staring me right in the face, which is, okay, well, number one, it seemed like the DoorDash side had a younger crew of drivers. More of them tended to be female than male, actually, which was the complete opposite on the ride-sharing side. And so today, even to this day, DoorDash with 7 million active drivers, you have almost 60% female. The average driver at DoorDash would do 3 hours, 4 hours a week. 90% would do fewer than 10 hours. This is completely different from ride-sharing, where this was almost in some ways like Taxi 2.0. Right, where these are generally speaking full-time or folks looking for full-time kind of work. And so, it was two completely different groups of people. And so I think all of these insights put together, these were the only thoughts going through my head, at least in year one, year two, that gave us enough confidence, to keep going. Did we know that it would be, as large as it ultimately turned out? No, of course not. This is the luck part, right? But the part that we had a strong point of view on was there was absolutely differentiation, and that the bet was if there was a market to be created, it would be created outside of the city centers. If you look at the data now, looking backwards, about 80% of the growth in the industry came in the suburbs.
I love your V1, I have to say, and so why don't you tell the folks here what was the V1 of quote unquote DoorDash?
Yeah, we took 45 minutes to build it, so it wasn't as fully built as some of the other services that you're probably going to hear from. We built PaloAltoDelivery.com. which is a static HTML page that had 8 PDF menus. So these are menus of 8 restaurants that we really liked in the Palo Alto area. We're at Stanford at the time as students. And there's a Google Voice number that you could call to place an order. Once you called this Google Voice number, it would ring the cell phones of the 4 founders. And whoever would pick up first would basically take down the order, place the order on your behalf, go and pick up the order and deliver it to you. The only way that we could collect payment was, I used to work at Square, or it's called Block now, but at Square, where they had these white dongles that you could use to collect payment through the audio jack of your iPhones, and that's literally how we did the first orders.
That's incredible. I assume the new product launches at DoorDash do not get this level of MVP. So yeah, how do you now decide?
I know it sounds really embarrassing, and trust me, it was very embarrassing. We learned a lot of things, even from that MVP. The number one thing, as I mentioned, that I was terrified of was, would anyone care? And that's what we were really testing. But even over time, for the first few years of DoorDash's life, we had a pretty lean team, maybe 15 to 20 engineers or so. And as I was kind of, thinking about what people should work on, we had maybe one person work on the consumer product. Everyone else worked on something that was touching the merchant, in this case, the restaurant, or the dasher, the driver. Because if you think about like the job to be done is to bring you something, right? In the time that we quoted you and in the condition that you would expect. It wasn't to do anything else. You're not going to open our app and obsess over its UI or play with it or find a date or whatever. It was a utility product. And so even though it was a very embarrassing V1, I actually thought that, the lesson we took from it was that the thing that customers cared about, because we did all the deliveries ourselves, wasn't necessarily what the app looked like. That lesson, maybe not like, ship always an embarrassing product lesson, but that lesson of focusing on the right thing for the customer, that still is what we hope for all of our experiments at DoorDash.
What did people actually initially get wrong about the company? Like what was it that you saw that was just not obvious to other people?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's my place to say like what people got wrong. I mean, I can say like what we saw that maybe others either didn't believe in or maybe dismissed too early.
I'm sure you have very nicely phrased.
No, it's not even
from BCs being like, "Wow,
No, typically we just got no responses or something. But no, and trust me, I had over 100 rejections in like a span of over 1,000 days, where the company almost constantly ran out of money. So yes, we definitely had our tough moments. I would say a few things. I think that there are eras of doubt. If you will. In the very beginning, we did a similar accelerator program. We were out of Y Combinator, and we were not the cool kids on demo day. We were bottom of the half, stack ranking, something like this. And I couldn't raise a dime, and we were running out of capital. So that was the very first time, that DoorDash almost ran out of money. The first doubts were about, there is no sign of demand. You're this little thing that is a 12-week-old project. Let's forget the word company. Why should I care? How can it be big? So I think that was the opening era of doubt. As more and more people got into it, and there were a lot of competitors, the question became, well, why will you win? Then after that, some big competitors got in. Companies like Amazon or Uber were in the space, who had way more capital than we had. Hundreds of times, maybe thousands of times of capital deployed versus the amount that we raised. So then the question becomes, well, how are you going to win, this cash burning machine? And even if you win, why would you want to win a cash burning machine? That's a terrible, it's like, even if you win, you lose kind of thing. But you know what though? Like the thing in each one of those things, and this is where you as the founder have to, finely tune that line between delusion and knowing that you have something that others don't understand, is what are the customers telling you? You have quantitative ways in which you can tell this, and there are very specific metrics for if you're running a consumer business or an enterprise business to know whether or not you have product market fit. There's also qualitative ways. We, the founders, did deliveries for almost virtually every day the first 3 years of the company's life. So we would hear over and again like what was working or not working. We would hear from consumers, we'd hear from restaurants, we'd hear from other dashers, other drivers. And so we had strong points of view on each side of our marketplace that, could explain what was happening in the numbers. And so when you have one set of facts, which is, your customers, you have another set of facts where what are called like opinions and perceptions. You got to trust the facts. That's ultimately what kept us going. Now, it wasn't always like rainbows and sunshine. I mean, like we had people churn from the company voluntarily, right? We had awesome people who, we would tell, it's like, look, the cash balance is going down to zero. You may want to consider, polishing your resumes. And some people chose to do that. And so it wasn't like it was always perfect or an up and to the right kind of story. But I think for us, at least, it was the customer data and anecdotes that ultimately won the day.
When you started DoorDash, it was like 2013.
Yeah.
Tell us, what was the state of the market and what got you excited to even work on this, given that there had been other, sort of attempts that had been, raised a lot of money and, burned a lot of money along the way. Like,
yeah, I think this was one of the things that was most attractive to me, actually, when we were starting DoorDash. It didn't start from like studying the market per se, but we can go into that story, separately. But one of the things that we did do was we did kind of, look at the market and actually realized it was a very undertapped market, which I think kind of was opposite what a lot of people said, which is, oh, there's a bunch of people in this space, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But really what was happening at the time was you had, even though it was 2013, delivery was only happening at about 20,000 restaurants, where these tended to be places like the pizza shops or the Chinese restaurants, a lot of places in New York City, not a lot of places outside of New York City. But there's 1 million restaurants in America. So there's 980,000 people not playing in the delivery game, 20,000 of them in it. And so you had a lot of companies, what they were doing were they're just sending literally over fax machines, believe it or not, faxed orders into a restaurant, and then the restaurant would have their own delivery worker kind of fulfill that order. That's really what was going on. So to us, the question was like, well, what would happen if you allowed everyone, the other 980,000, to offer delivery? What would actually happen? Would you actually, create a marketplace where you can have local businesses connect with local consumers? And so that was really what we saw. We did study, some of the early attempts at this. Webvan obviously is a classic case study. And the lesson, at least I learned there, was they just were early on getting no demand. They actually had the unit economics in a great spot. They had a great product, great vision, great team, great backers, but no customers or not enough customers. And so the model for them was working here in the West Coast. It wasn't really working outside of San Francisco. And so the question for us was actually the same question that I think they were probably terrified of, was, would anyone care? Obviously, we live in a capitalistic market. The reason why maybe delivery hasn't been solved is because nobody wants it to be. And so that was probably the single biggest question I had in my mind when we were starting DoorDash, which is, would anyone care if we enabled all 1 million restaurants to offer delivery?
Was there a early sort of just absolutely game-changing hire, the first role where you really felt like, okay, now we're getting really high quality, folks?
They're all going to be that way. Just think about it. It's a bit of a math problem, right? Like when you have 4 people and then you add 1, that person's going to add quite a lot of difference, or hopefully. Our official employee number 1 was actually a dasher, a driver, who we converted into our first customer support employee. He is probably one of the highest IQ, if not the highest IQ people I know at DoorDash. And he just had this natural intelligence of being able to dispatch everything inside his brain. After maybe 100 or 200 concurrent drivers out on the road at any time, could he actually no longer process? There wasn't enough RAM in that brain of his to actually do the dispatching. Steve was a difference maker. You're looking for someone who can, first and foremost, I think the thing that we learned was, if you're the first to do the job, whether, if you're one of the founders of every job, that was kind of a rule we had, a management principle we lived by, then you kind of understand what that job is. And so once you understood what that job was, you can very crisply explain to someone what they would be doing, and they can self-select into whether or not they want to do that job. It's usually not a very sexy job, or it's not done in a very sexy way. Probably very low to no automation, highly manual, highly bespoke, and you'll know if when they do it better than you, because A, the problems go away. B, it somehow gets automated, done with higher quality and lower cost. And so those are attributes of some of our earliest hires.
Give us your kind of take on AI right now, both from a DoorDash standpoint. Obviously, you're also on the board of Meta and a bunch of other things, and so you have a really interesting kind of perch, to see this ecosystem.
I would say there's always two wars I've been thinking about in the business world. One is the war for atoms, which is who thinks about organizing the physical world, and then obviously there's the war for bits, and the war for attention. And where does attention start? There's definitely some truth in the setup or the premise of the question, where I think in the war for bits, that is less a specific problem that DoorDash is working on. That in many ways, one of the things that you as founders, especially early stage founders, have to say is, what are you not going to work on? Is a very important problem to answer. That is not a problem that DoorDash is answering. Right? We are not in the war for bits or attention. There's a lot of people in that war right now, and it's very violent right now and very tumultuous. Now, our job is to interface with those players, and there's obviously going to be a rise of agents. Now, mostly we've seen that on the enterprise side. We haven't yet seen much on the consumer side. I'm hopeful that some of you will be building those, and I think there's going to be required new paradigms in order for that to happen, because right now, the existing paradigms that I've seen, at least, of agents is they kind of take an existing protocol and they just add latency to it. And that's fine if you're doing something in the background or you're doing deep research, but it's less fine if you're doing something like a utility experience or an app where you want instantaneous response. I think on the physical side, there's a lot going on too. It just doesn't happen maybe as quickly as some of the things you read about in the press. Obviously, there's lots of things happening in the autonomous world right now. It just doesn't get the kind of coverage or hype cycle that maybe things in the LLM world, is currently experiencing. It doesn't mean that the progress isn't there. I'd actually argue the progress is quite tremendous. Then there is what I call like AI in every part of your P&L. An exercise I always look at every year is I look at every row of our P&L and I say, how do we make those better? And trust me, you can have AI, play a role in some of these manual activities that ought to be either automated or have done with very few human intervention. That is true from a variable cost perspective. That's true from a fixed cost perspective. Probably a comment more for, later stage companies, where the P&Ls are a little bit more developed, a little bit more range bounded in terms of the scenarios. But, those are the ways in which, we're thinking about AI.
Let's give Tony a hand. This is amazing.
The final interview would be with me as an engineer, but we'd be doing deliveries together. That was my code for asking you to self-select out of the process. Not every engineer wants to spend a Friday night with me doing deliveries. There's no such thing as a job title. This ownership mentality, which is one of our core things we looked for, that meant that you will do anything, irrespective. And so that was my test.